Good evening, welcome to the first of our live stories in this new season, and very welcome to our guest and to Nick, who's going to host us. I'm going to hand over to you, Nick, okay?
John, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm just delighted that Julia's come to be with us. Over the years, anytime you've asked Pat, her mother, who's here, where her daughter is, she was always somewhere in Europe, Africa, or elsewhere in the world, and you'll get to find out why in just a moment. The last year or so, of course, there have been massive changes. The pandemic has limited her movement. And then 3 months ago, she was married. She's still Julia Downing in her public roles. She's actually Mrs. Richardson, and Michael's here. Does Michael really know what he's taken on?
I don't think so, no.
With a life as full as Julia's, I know I'll be having to skip over many things, and we'll leave time at the end for anyone to ask questions and to fill in some of the gaps. But to go back, you took a nursing degree, and many outside the medicine world will imagine a career path, nurse, staff nurse, ward sister, matron, although all the names, I'm sure, have changed since I was anywhere involved in it, but all within a traditional hospital structure. Was that what you were buying into at the time?
I think that's what I thought I was going to do. I thought I would qualify as a nurse, and I did. I was a staff nurse in the cancer unit in London, and then I was a sister, and I guess I thought I'd do that forever and a day, but it wasn't to be the case.
Because it was, I think, the first year of your degree, you were working in a cancer hospital in Cardiff, and it was that changed your direction?
Yes, I worked in Valinga, which is the cancer hospital in Cardiff, but also I did an elective at St Christopher's Hospice in London, and it was still when Dame Cicely Saunders was there, and it just showed me a completely different way of doing nursing, really, and it showed what a difference we could make. I'd looked after somebody on a ward who was sadly dying, and they'd been moved to a single ward, and then people were scared to go in. They didn't know what to say, and that didn't feel right to me. So then I went to St Christopher's, and I saw a whole new way of doing things. So that changed my life, really.
Working with Dame Cicely must have been an amazing experience.
It was an amazing experience, and I have a memory of pushing a bed down. At that stage, the chapel at St Christopher's was on the ground floor, and you could get the beds into the lift, and we took this lady in a bed down to the chapel, and Dame Cicely was preaching. An hour earlier she'd been upstairs doing the medical work, and then there she was preaching, and we took communion together, and yeah.
I remember going to interview her in Sydenham, and I was just struck by what an amazing lady she was. I gather that she'd thought about the hospice for 11 years, and then she acted after praying for 11 years when she read Psalm 37, "Trust in the Lord and do what is right, and he will answer your prayers." Did you ever talk to her about her vision?
I got to talk to her a bit, not a lot, because I was only a student nurse, so I was very junior then, and I was shy and a bit in awe of this lady, so it was a bit scary to talk to her. But yeah, I mean, I just talked to her about her vision for palliative care and the importance of seeing the person as a whole. Too often it's all about the physical care, and the importance of the spiritual side of things, and the social and psychological, and bringing that all together, and caring not just for the individual, and not caring for somebody with a condition, but caring for that individual and their family. And the importance of our faith, and we used to have prayers with the patients in the morning, every morning, and just the importance to her and to me of faith in all that we do.
The fact that it took her 11 years of praying to make any change, was that symptomatic of the attitude towards dying at the time?
I think it's potentially yes, partly the attitude, and one of the things that the pandemic has done has actually brought us into talking more about death and dying and life, and bringing some of these things into the open. which at that stage it wasn't, but also bringing about change. I mean, some of the work we've been doing in Uganda, we've been praying for certain things to happen, and it's kind of 10, 15, 20 years, and things take time to happen. You can't just bring about change just overnight. So that importance of prayer and...
And it was your time there that gave you a new vision on where you wanted to go.
Yes, I saw things being done differently, and I felt within palliative care that as a nurse I could make a big difference. And although I initially worked in cancer care and in oncology, but there was a lot of palliative care within that. So the two to me went hand in hand.
Would it be too strong to say that Dame Cicely revolutionised the attitude to palliative care throughout the country, not just in southeast London, but throughout the country and further afield?
Well, yeah, not just throughout the country, throughout the world. I mean, she and there's Balfour Mount and a few people in Canada and America. But yes, I mean, she's known as the founder of the modern hospice movement, palliative care movement. So yes, her impact around the world was massive.
So you say the palliative care movement, hospice movement, so there are a number of independent hospices all over the place. What is the difference? You can see the question coming. How has the National Health Service changed?
Well, the National Health Service has changed a lot. I think many hospices have become a bit more integrated into the National Health Service. I mean, in the UK, many hospices are separate. Some are integrated. In other parts of the world, the palliative care programs are very much integrated into the national health system. So it does vary in different parts of the world as to how palliative care is provided.
So while we're talking at this stage, you were still doing your degree?
When I went to St Christopher's, yes, I was still doing my degree.
And so where did you go? When you finished your degree, what was then your decision?
When I finished my degree, I moved to London and I worked at the Hammersmith and then Charing Cross, working in the oncology unit. Working, as you said earlier, as a staff nurse and then as a sister in the cancer unit in Hammersmith Hospital and then Charing Cross Hospital.
And then at some stage you linked up with the Mildmay Hospital.
So I then worked in the Royal Marsden Hospital, which many of you will have heard of, and I was a lecturer in cancer and palliative care. And then I was looking through the nursing journal. I was preparing a lecture, and I was trying to show the disparities. So if you wanted to be a nurse consultant in London, you needed a PhD, and in the north of the country, you didn't. And I turned the page, and this job just jumped out of me, which was with the Mildmay Centre in Uganda to run their education programme. And about 10 minutes later, my friend from church in London rang me, and she said, "I've just seen a job with your name on it." And it was the same job. So I applied for it. I didn't tell Mum and Dad because I thought Mum would be having, panics with me moving to Uganda. But interestingly, my dad's cousin and his wife met on a blind date in Uganda when they were missionaries there. So we knew about Uganda. I got the job, invited Mum and Dad round for dinner in London, and I said, "I've got a new job, it's in Uganda." And I was dreading what they said, and "Mum, I don't know if you remember what you said, but you said to me, I always knew you would go back to Africa." So I'd been there on my elective in my degree. And so I'd been dreading telling Mum, and God had been preparing her, obviously.
And so, going to Uganda, what was the focus there?
Initially, the focus was working at the Mildmay Centre, which is linked to Mildmay in London. So it was an HIV/AIDS palliative care centre. At that stage, we didn't have any antiretroviral medication, and so all people with HIV were receiving palliative care.
You see, this is something, looking back, we find it very difficult to understand because the attitude to HIV was totally different at the time. Everyone who had HIV must have been promiscuous. You couldn't touch them because, and I think it was Mildmay, the Christian hospital in London, was where Princess Diana was photographed holding the hand of a patient, which that must have been the change of people's attitudes in many ways.
That was a big change to people's attitudes. And of course, in places like Uganda, so when I went to Mildmay, we had, I think it was about 1,300 children just in our service with HIV. And in the UK, they only had about 1,000 children in the whole of the UK. So the numbers were just massive. We had over 10,000 adults. And so it was just a completely different situation. And I remember some of my colleagues at the Marsden and from Charing Cross were going, what are you going to Uganda for? There's lots of AIDS there, you know. Are you going to be safe? And, you know, my response was, well, I know that most of the people I'm going to be working with have got HIV, so I will be making sure I take all the precautions, whereas in the UK, you didn't know who did or didn't. And, but
it's interesting, you've slipped in a second level of your career as if it's just absolutely normal, because you talked about clinical, which that's the nursing, but you were teaching. So we've moved into another level, the academic, as it were.
Yes, so I moved from Hammersmith and Charing Cross, where I was doing clinical work, to the Marsden, where I was teaching, but I still had a clinical role because we supervised students on the wards. But it was mainly we were teaching, we were running a diploma, degree, masters in cancer and palliative care.
So when you went out to Uganda, there was the clinical level and the academic level as well?
Yes, so in Uganda at the Mildmay Centre there was two big services, the clinical services and the education services. And I went out to run the education services. But within 6 months of going out there, all the directors from the clinical services had left, and so I was kind of doing both. They assure me it was nothing to do with me. So I ended up mainly doing education, but also running the clinical services as well.
So we've got the clinical, the academic, but also we now come to a management, because you set up the African Palliative Care Association, is that right?
Yes. So whilst I was at Mildmay, we had a meeting actually organised by the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, which was held in Cape Town. And they brought together people from Zimbabwe, South Africa, Kenya, and Tanzania and Uganda involved in palliative care. And we felt that there was a need to try and develop palliative care across Africa, because there really wasn't a lot of palliative care being provided. And so I was part of there were 6 of us who set up the African Palliative Care Association.
And what did that do?
So its aim was to help develop palliative care across sub-Saharan Africa. So there was some education, some research, but a lot of advocacy. So when I first went to Uganda, we went out to see a lady who was in quite a lot of pain, and the only pain medication we had was paracetamol. So there was nothing stronger than paracetamol in the country. And so one of the things that the African Palliative Care Association does is try and increase access to medication so that we can manage people's pain, so that we can manage their symptoms. So a lot of advocacy at that level, advocacy with governments, with the ministries of health, a lot of ignorance. Nobody knew what palliative care was. They didn't realise that we could manage pain, that we could manage symptoms, that we could have an impact, that it wasn't a matter of there's nothing more we can do. Actually, there's quite a lot that we can do. And so working with governments, trying to get policy changed. It's quite a broad remit. So I went to Namibia, and one day I was meeting with the Minister of Health. The next day I was working with the community volunteers, encouraging and supporting them. So it was a really varied role.
Yes, we added another layer now, a political layer. That's amazing. You had the authority to go in and see ministers of health and so on.
Yep.
That's great. By this time, had you got your PhD by then?
I had by then, yes. So whilst I was working at Mildmay, I did a PhD looking at the impact of palliative care education on palliative care in rural Uganda. So yeah, I'd got that.
And let's go to the academic side just to clear that one up, because you were appointed Professor in Palliative Care in Makerere University in Kampala, and you're also visiting Professor at Edge Hill University in Birmingham, the University of South Wales, Edinburgh, Belgrade, research fellow at King's College London, appropriately in the Cicely Saunders Institute. Boy, your experience indicates a significant change in the role of palliative care.
Yes, I mean, it always feels a bit strange saying this, but my colleague and I were the first two professors in palliative care in Africa. So it's new. And one of the key things is to get palliative care accepted within the medical fields. You need to have people at an academic level. You need to have people in the universities. Otherwise, it's not seen as having that credibility. And so that's one of the areas that we've been working at, is to trying to get African colleagues with PhDs who can then be appointed to the universities so that we have an academic presence. Because it's like when you're talking with the politicians, you have to go with some certain data and rationale. When you're talking with the medical teams, you need to have that kudos as well.
So you've been breaking the glass ceiling not for yourself, but for yourself as well, obviously, but for the whole idea of the seriousness, the potential of palliative care.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, yes. I mean, it's just the thought that there's so many, and we have a map which shows starkly the countries where there is no palliative care. There's a map which shows morphine equivalent, and America and Canada are very big, and if you know anything about this, there's a bit of a crisis there in overuse of opioids and misuse of opioids. But then there's a whole lot of the world, like Latin America, Asia, Eastern Europe, most of Africa, that kind of disappears because they just don't have that. They don't have the analgesics. They don't have that. And so just together with there's a team of people around the world trying to make that difference, trying to bring about that change so that anybody, wherever they are, can have access to palliative care.
It just occurs to me, I think I heard recently that someone wants to bring back relaxing of euthanasia in either the House of Lords and I think also in the Scottish Parliament. That always seems to say there is these poor people, there's nothing to help them in their pain, in their dying. So people are totally ignoring palliative care, aren't they?
Yeah, people see things from different perspectives, and that's partly that even in the UK there is a misunderstanding about palliative care. You know, people think palliative care is just about end-of-life care. It's just about the dying phase. It's not. It's about enabling people to live. Cicely Saunders said it's about putting life into their days. And it's about enabling people to live to the best that they can, whether that be for a few weeks or for a few years. And so there is this misconception about what palliative care is. And we've had great discussions about, should we change the term? Should it not be palliative care? Because people think of end-of-life care. But actually, whatever term we use, it would come to mean the same thing. So it's kind of us as palliative care professionals, we're not giving the right message. And so how can we adjust that so that when there are these discussions around euthanasia, the palliative care voice is strong and people understand what that voice is?
But what can we do? I just get so angry when I hear all these comments, and it's, yes, we must have the right to die. And you think there are people who feel, I'm being a nuisance. I must allow euthanasia because I'm occupied. Well, there's still God's life in them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, with palliative care, if we can hopefully care for the individual and their family, then hopefully they can see that they're not a nuisance. Yeah. So it's turning the viewpoint around.
With all the training, because you've trained a lot of people as well, are you encouraged? Do you see well-trained people going out and being change makers? Yes, I mean, we've still got a long way to go, but it is exciting. It's exciting seeing some of the people that we've trained over the years. You know, I learned quite early on that you never know who you're training. So one of the first courses that I ran in Uganda, we had this doctor from right up in the north. She was a paediatrician and she came to learn about palliative care, and she was lovely. And she was a
Christian, and we prayed with her on several occasions. And 10 years later, she was the Minister for Health for Uganda. And it's like, because of the culture in Uganda, I was her teacher. So I kind of had an open door to the Minister of Health, and not just me, but our colleagues as well. And so you never know who you're training. You never know who you're talking to, and the impact that can have many years later on.
Progress different, presumably. I mean, you work not only in UK, but Africa, India, Serbia, and so on. It varies, does it, the progress?
It varies, yes. Some places have got a lot more developed in palliative care. It's challenging because one of the things in our education is that it's not just about theory, it's about practice. So you want people to see palliative care in practice and the difference that you can make. Well, if there isn't really any palliative care going on in the country, then it's actually hard to do that. So it often takes a while to develop enough practitioners and have enough services so that you can see palliative care in action.
Medicine is a very personal relationship. You must need to be very aware of the different cultures, because some people can do more harm than good, can't they?
Yes, culture is such an interesting thing, and I think, so I've been working in Uganda now for over 20 years, and I think the more that I work in Uganda, the more I realise I will never understand the culture. And the culture in Serbia, I don't know if any of you have been to Serbia, but I don't speak Serbian, and you'd be doing training and they'd be doing group work, and the level of noise in the room would be getting higher and higher and higher, and it would seem as if they were arguing with each other and shouting with each other, but actually that was just the way they do things, and they speak a lot louder. And for me, I was kind of, what are they doing? What have I done? What have I said that's getting them so angry? Whereas in Uganda, it's the opposite. They don't lift their voices very much. So learning the culture in terms of education, but then also about how do you talk about illness and death and dying? How do you involve the family? Who is the right person to involve? Is it the family? Who has the say? Who has the power? Is it the individual? In some cultures, as the patient, then it would be my decision. In other cultures, it would be the family's decision what treatment that person had. So trying to fit palliative care within the appropriate culture is so important.
And in some countries, presumably, if you were simply Miss Downing or nurse, they wouldn't take any notice of you. But having professor or doctor in front of your name must have helped.
It has. When I first went to Uganda, people assumed I was a doctor rather than a nurse. And as soon as I corrected them, their attitude towards me changed. But as soon as I then had doctor in front of my name and professor, it does open doors that otherwise wouldn't have been opened. But I'm also I've learned to be, do I say political with a small p? So, if they want to think I'm a doctor and it actually doesn't make much difference, then I let them think that, if that's what's needed to get them to listen about palliative care. But at the same time, I'm a nurse. I'm very proud of being a nurse, and I want to strengthen and develop nursing as well. So it's kind of learning how to play the game sometimes. That sounds awful, doesn't it?
But the world you're in is very tough, not easy, and I think you got a sense of that ahead of you when you were flying out to Uganda. I gather your time on the plane was not the easiest.
No, I think I said goodbye to Mum. We had breakfast at Gatwick Airport, and I had beans on toast. Why do I remember that I had beans on toast? I don't know. And then I cried most of the way out on the plane, thinking, what have I done? I don't know anyone in Uganda. I was quite shy. What am I doing? But I knew that was where God wanted me. And so, that kind of kept me going. But yes, I was scared stiff going out.
Now, if you can't understand how one person can do all that Julia does, medic, academic, teacher, manager, writer. Oh, we haven't talked about it. I mean, I've seen the CV, and I think there were 400, 500 documents that you had written. But we've done all that, but hold on to your seats, because we're now going into the stratosphere, because she's also a musician. She was trained at the Trinity College of Music, played in 5 orchestras, is it?
Oh, various orchestras, yeah.
Yes. You play 5 instruments?
I play the organ, piano, violin, viola, the harp not very well, and the guitar not very well.
And including one of the 5 orchestras is the Symphony,
Sevenoaks
Symphony.
Sevenoaks Symphony, yeah. Okay. When I'm here, but because I usually abroad a lot, I'm not very often here.
And there was no orchestra in Uganda, so?
So we started one, so the Kampala Symphony Orchestra. It sounds very grand, Kampala Symphony Orchestra. It's probably a bit more like a school orchestra, but yeah.
And you sing in and you accompany choirs?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I'm in Weald Church, so I'm the director of music in the church, so I do the church choir. And then Kampala singers in Uganda, I either sing or I accompany them. So keeps me out of mischief. And
you were musical director for a number of shows at the National Theatre of Kampala, including South Pacific, I think?
Yeah, South Pacific, Sound of Music, Joseph, Godspell, yeah, all sorts. It sounds grand, the National Theatre, but it's not like the National Theatre here. So.
And you played for a very prestigious international organisation in Kampala, wasn't it? Was it Kampala? Chogam?
Oh, yes. So when we had the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting there, we had a concert, and it was quite amazing. We had musicians come out from various different parts of the Commonwealth as well, and had this wonderful concert.
And you were involved with the Kampala Music School, first as a teacher, and then you became chairman of the board.
Yes. So,
You can hear the laughter. People can't quite believe it. This is true.
So some friends, Graham and Fiona Carr, and Fiona's sister was Arbel Billinghurst in Sevenoaks, and Arbel and John Billinghurst, I don't know if you knew
And his
them.
father lived in College
Quinton,
Orchard.
Yes.
And his brother lived in... No.
Yeah.
He was the only Otford.
But anyway, Fiona and another colleague, Ulrika, set up a music school in Kampala because when Idi Amin was there, he destroyed all the instruments, so there was not really much classical music in Uganda. So Fiona was a pianist and Uli was a singer, and they set up the music school. And they needed a viola teacher. Now, I'm not a good viola. I play the viola, but that wouldn't be my first choice of teaching. But they needed a viola teacher, so I did some viola teaching for them and got involved and became chair of the board. Yep.
You've always used your music gifts in church. You mentioned St George's Wheel. What do you do there?
So we grew up in Sevenoaks, and I grew up in the choir, with my little ruff and choir things. And I actually learnt the organ in St George's Wheels. I then went off for 20 years. I then came back, and so I'm the organist. I run the band and do the choir and whatever else needs doing in terms of music.
Well, there's a joke that there's often armed neutrality between the minister and the organist. I think one minister said, "What's the difference between a church organist and a terrorist?" And the answer was, you can negotiate with a terrorist. Yeah. But you're very involved. You're actually part of the ministry team. It's not a separate...
Yes, no, I'm really involved, part of the ministry team. And the church have been great because, obviously, when there's no pandemic, I still travel a lot. And so we have choir rehearsals around my travel, and they seem quite happy to fit in around me.
Travelling as much as you do could be extremely lonely, but you seem to put down roots.
Yeah, sometimes it's lonely because sometimes it's too many nights in a hotel on your own. But because I tend to go back to a lot of the same places, I now have friends all over the world, which I'm very lucky. And I've really missed it actually during the pandemic. I haven't missed waiting at airports or sitting on planes, but I have missed seeing friends and colleagues around the world and being in different cultures and different environments.
You've seen very close up because you get involved with the churches where you go. You've seen churches in various countries. You've seen where Christians are under pressure, culturally, legally, sometimes even persecuted. We've got it pretty cosy here, haven't we?
It's different everywhere. Yeah. Some places it's really hard, and I've been to places, countries that are mainly Muslim, and I've been asked about why I do what I do and how I've got to where I was asked to share my leadership journey in one of the Arab countries, and I'm like, can I really share this? Because to talk about my leadership journey, I have to talk about my faith, because that's the two are so intertwined. So I was a bit nervous about it, but I did, and it was fine because of the way I did it, but also because faith was such an important part of that life, that culture as well, albeit a different thing.
Dare I mention it, but you're also a member of the Otford Tennis Club, and with all the immense amount of time you have to spare, you've taken up running.
Yeah, I wouldn't say running per se. I go out and jog. No, again, it's part of the reason I took up running, we were working in Serbia with Hospice of Hope here in Otford, and we were due to do some training up country. At the last minute, I didn't go because there was a meeting with the Ministry of Health, and my colleagues were in a minibus that was knocked off the road. It turned over. One of my colleagues broke a neck, one died, one broke I don't know how many bones. It was just horrendous. And so we decided the following year to run the 5K at the Belgrade Marathon in memory of our colleague who died. I couldn't run at all, I couldn't even run for 10 seconds. So that's how I kind of got into running, and then we did the 5K, and then the next year we did the half marathon, and I've kind of kept going with a bit of running.
COVID, coronavirus, just to finish with, and then open to other people from the floor. We obviously can't just batten down the hatches for a few more months. This will have a long-term effect, will it?
I think so. I think this is we don't know, do we? We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if there's going to be more variants. We don't know what the next pandemic's going to be. But we do need to learn somehow to live with this. We need to learn what are we doing now that we weren't doing before that we can do differently. So, do I really need to get on a plane and travel to all these places? There's some things you can't do unless you're face-to-face, but we've done a lot of things virtually. So I think the impact, both in terms of health, in terms of travel, in terms of how we do things, is going to be ongoing.
And you've got such a broad perspective. I'll throw a figure that I think I've heard, and you can correct it if not. We're talking about between 80 and 90% of people in this country vaccinated. Someone told me that in Africa it is 2%. Is that right?
Yes, in some countries, certainly in Uganda, it's only about 6%, I think now. They just haven't had the vaccine available, and they've had the last few months have been really difficult because the COVID has just been so rife, really.
And you've been, those last 2 years, you've been working with the World Health Organization.
We've been working with the World Health Organization, with Dr. Tedros, the Director General, about palliative care, about COVID, about ongoing developments in palliative care. And one of the sad things about the pandemic, there's lots of sad things, but obviously it has raised the profile in some ways of palliative care, or the need for it. But also, even in countries in the UK, we were running out of medicines. There were shortages of medicines, which we don't normally experience here, whereas a lot of other countries experience that on a day-to-day basis. And so trying to see how we can make sure that doesn't happen again in the future, and how we can make sure that everybody has access to the medicines that they need.
Julia, it's been a sprint to try to get through. But as I promised, we'll open it to the floor. And I think, yes, we've got a microphone. So if you put your hand in the air, then John can bring you the mic so everyone can hear the question as well as the answer.
Julia, quite amazing, I might say. And this time next month, I'll be sat in that chair. I was going to give nick my CV. I'm not sure I'm going to now. I wondered, we're about to start healing services in this church. And I wondered in your journey whether you'd prayed for and seen much healing. And if not, whether you prayed for and seen people take on Christ into their lives before they died.
One of the freedoms that we have in Uganda that we don't really have here is that as nurses, as doctors, we nearly always pray with our patients. It's kind of not expected, but it's seen as a normal part of actually the work of the nurses and doctors is to pray with the patients. So I have regularly prayed with people who were dying in Uganda about all sorts of different things, but regularly prayed. They don't necessarily understand me, and I don't necessarily understand them, so I might not know what's actually gone on, but knowing that God's presence is there with them. I have been involved in healing services and things as well through the church and stuff, so that's something that I feel quite comfortable about praying with people about healing. And I believe God heals in different ways. God heals through the medical profession, and God heals in miraculous ways as well. And sometimes you never know which has happened, but also, sometimes it's time for us to go and be with the Lord. So, yeah, but it is a privilege to pray with people. And can I just to add? I mean, this is kind of an answer to prayer. So during the first pandemic, because I stupidly thought that I wouldn't have much work to do, which wasn't the case, but also because they were really short, I helped out at the hospice. So I was working on the ward in the hospice during the first lockdown. And we had a young girl from our village who sadly was in the hospice. And the people in the church, people from all over, were praying for her and were praying that she would have a Christian looking after her on the day that she died. And it just happened to be me. Well, that wasn't just happened. I was in the place there that God wanted. I was doing what God wanted me to do. So there's so many different ways that I believe that in my work that I've been in the right place at the right time.
Julia, thank you so much for talking to us and being with us this evening. You mentioned when you saw the job advertised in Uganda, it leapt off the page, and that was confirmed by a friend. How have you known, that you're working within God's will, within God's plan throughout, please? I think it's a challenge that faces all Christians.
I think there's been key points when I've known that I'm going to the right place. So that was very key. The job jumped out of me, and there was lots of reasons why I shouldn't have got that job, and I got it. And it was clearly where I was supposed to be. I did that job for 3 years, then for another 2, and then that was a bit of a challenge. But again, I praying about it, opening a few doors and some closing and others remaining open, and again doing something that probably I shouldn't have been the right person to do, but ended up doing that. I think the hardest time was almost in 2010 when I decided to not live permanently in Uganda, but to be back here some of the time. Mum and Dad were kind of saying, well, you went for 3 years, and that was 10 years ago. I think that was the hardest. That was hard. And then, at various different times, I've felt this is something that I should be doing, and opportunities have come. But it isn't always clear. Sometimes it's, I don't know. And I think one of the challenges at the moment with the pandemic is everything's changed for me so much. It's like, is it going to go back? Am I going to go back to being in Uganda or being wherever? And if not, what does that mean in terms of work and things? So I think it's an ongoing prayer about, please, Lord, show me where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing and who I'm supposed to be with and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's clearer than others. There's no easy answer, I'm afraid.
To say, Julia, I read your CV this afternoon. And as I read it, I had a growing sense of inferiority. Listening to you this evening, I'm exhausted. Somewhere, I can't remember where it is, Paul talks about the fact the Holy Spirit gives him energy. And that's how I account for you. The Holy Spirit is using you. He's giving you the energy and the ability. And God is blessing you wonderfully. And we praise him for that. And may that continue. And may he share it with us a little bit as well. And the other thing is, we talk about hospices of joy. You come across, you live life to the full, you deal with a subject that people should find very depressing, especially in children. But because of your faith in God, in Christ, you actually seem to just vibrate life. I'm not trying to flatter you. This is how it comes across. And I really do appreciate you coming this evening and sharing this. We've recorded it because a number of people want it. Would you mind us putting it on our website?
That's fine.
So, because I think many people, as we talk about this, they'll want to listen and to actually hear what you have to say. Ladies and gentlemen, let us show our appreciation. The prayer. Father, we do thank you for the gift of life. Sometimes, Lord, we allow little things to kind of impinge on that life and just rob us of the joy that you want us to have. But as we've shared this evening, Lord, as we've listened, we just thank you for what you're doing around the world through your people, reaching out to people in need, in despair, people who are suffering and giving them hope. I pray for Julia, I pray for her colleagues, I pray for all the different medical organisations that she works with, but all of them as they strive to work, especially through this pandemic, that, Lord, you will inspire, you'll guide, you'll bless, and you'll cause success in the lives of many people because of your faithful witnesses. And I do pray for Julia and for Michael that your blessing on their marriage. Father, in Jesus Christ. Amen.